person, Mrs. Marcia Blake Hall.
Ladies and gentlemen of the media and those joining us virtually on other platforms, good morning. Thanks for joining us at the Planning Institute of Jamaica's quarterly press briefing. Today, the Director General, Dr. Wayne Henry, will provide preliminary estimates on the performance of the economy for the October to December 2021 period. Dr. Henry is supported by Mr. James Stewart, Senior Director, Economic Planning and Research Division. Dr. Henry, over to you.
Thank you very much, Marcio. Good morning, everyone. Before I provide details on economic performance, let me take this opportunity to remind you of the purpose of these quarterly economic estimates provided by the PIOJ. The PIOJ presents preliminary estimates on economic performance for each quarter, approximately 6 weeks following the end of the quarter being reviewed. This is based on the latest available information from major data providers. This release of the preliminary estimate is consistent with protocols in all modern economies globally, where it is the common practice to release a first, second, and even a third preliminary estimate before the final official figures are released. In the case of Jamaica, the PIOJ releases a preliminary growth estimate within the first 6 weeks following the end of the quarter being reviewed, and Statin, the Statistical Institute of Jamaica, releases the official GDP figures at the end of the 3rd month following the quarter being reviewed. The release of preliminary outturn information is used by various stakeholders, including our international development partners, the private sector, as well as the government, for whom the magnitude and direction of sectoral performance is critical to inform planning and policy-related decisions. I would also like to reiterate that trends have shown that the gap between our initial estimate and the subsequent estimate produced by Statin is usually larger in times of extraordinary shocks, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic. That is, the variation between PIOJ's estimate and Statin's subsequent estimate is likely to be outside the usual band, both at the industry level as well as the overall growth outturn. Today, we are reporting an estimated real value added growth of 6% for the October to December 2021 quarter, relative to the corresponding quarter of 2020. The estimated outturn for the review quarter largely reflected the impact of 1, the continued relaxation of COVID-19 containment measures globally, which facilitated increased domestic and external demand, resulting in a general uptick in economic activities. 2, increased operating hours for businesses, which facilitated higher capacity utilization rates and production levels. 3, higher levels of employment as firms either resumed or ramped up operations. And 4, increased business and consumer confidence associated with the prospects for strengthened economic outturn and increased employment in the short to medium term. Developments in the goods producing industry. The goods producing industry is estimated to have increased by 0.4% due to improved performances in 2 of the 4 industries, namely agriculture and construction. Agriculture. Real value added for the agriculture, forestry, and fishing industry was estimated to have grown by 12.1%. This improvement reflected the impact of increased demand, particularly from the tourism sector, which grew consequent on the relaxation of previously implemented COVID-19 measures. Also positively impacting the industry was a continuation of measures implemented to improve output in the industry. The industry's performance benefited from a 13.9% increase in hectares of domestic crops reaped, reflecting improved weather conditions relative to the corresponding quarter in 2020, when the industry was negatively impacted by heavy rains. Growth was driven by higher output in the other agricultural crops and traditional export crops subcomponents. Other agricultural crops was estimated to have grown by 18%, reflecting higher production in all 9 crop groups. The most significant increases were recorded for condiments, up 50.2%, fruits, up 36.5%, vegetables, up 24.1%, and legumes, up 22.2%. Output of traditional export crops increased by 4.6%, largely driven by increased production of coffee, up 84.1%, cocoa, up 687.2%, and banana, up 1%, which outweighed a 59.2% decrease in sugarcane production to 21,190 tons. Animal farming is estimated to have decreased by 3.1%, due mainly to a contraction of 4.5% in broiler meat production, which outweighed a 3.7% increase in egg production. Mining and quarrying. Real value added for the mining and quarrying industry decreased by 64.7% due to declines in both alumina and crude bauxite production. Alumina production decreased by 75.3%, largely due to no production at the Jamalco refinery, which was impacted by a fire at the powerhouse, resulting in a cessation of operations since September 2021. The capacity utilization rate at alumina refineries decreased to 10.1%, down 30.6 percentage points. Crude bauxite production fell by 12.6%, reflecting the impact of lower demand from overseas purchasers. Consequently, the bauxite capacity utilization rate decreased to 51.4%, down 8.7 percentage points. Manufacturing. Real value added for the manufacturing industry declined by an estimated 0.9% due to a reduction in output in the other manufacturing sub-industry, which outweighed an estimated increase in the food, beverages, and tobacco sub-industry. Other manufacturing was estimated to have contracted, reflecting a decline in the production of petroleum products, due largely to the closure of the plant for approximately 44 days to facilitate maintenance activities. Production of all petroleum products surveyed declined, led by liquid petroleum gas, LPG, down 93.2%, automotive diesel oil, ADO, down 64.9%, gasoline, down 62.6%, turbo fuel, down 51.8%, and fuel oil, down 51.7%. A further decline was stymied by increased output of chemicals and chemical products and non-metallic minerals. The growth in the chemicals and chemical products reflected increases in fertilizer, up 44.3%, paint, up 30.8%, and aluminum sulfate, up 57.7%. For non-metallic minerals, growth was supported by a higher production of cement, up 12.1%, and clinker, up 4.9%. The food, beverages, and tobacco sub-industry was estimated to have grown, reflecting higher production for animal feed, up 2%, dairy products, up 16%, and edible oils, up 14.8%. Within the beverages component, the performance was supported by increased production of rum and alcohol, up 203.4%, and carbonated beverages, up 16.4%. Construction. Real value added for the construction industry increased by 6.4%, mainly spurred by growth in both the other construction and building construction components. This performance was reflected in a 16.6% real increase in the sales of construction-related inputs. Growth in the other construction component was due to an increase in capital expenditure on civil engineering activities by the National Works Agency, which disbursed $11.2 billion, up 192.9% relative to the corresponding quarter of 2020. Disbursement was largely for work on the Yallahs to Harborview leg of the Southern Coastal Highway Improvement Project, SCHIP, and JPS, which disbursed $3.9 billion, up 69.5%. The estimated growth in the building construction component was influenced mainly by a 2.7% increase in housing starts, as well as a 36.2% increase in the value of mortgages by the NHT. The performance of the non-residential category was also estimated to have grown, reflecting the build-out of commercial office space and the renovation and expansion of some hotel properties. Developments in the services industry. The services industry was estimated to have grown by 7.9% relative to the corresponding quarter of the previous year, reflecting higher real value added for all industries. Electricity and water supply industry was estimated to have recorded growth in real value added of 5.7%, reflecting an increase in electricity consumption, which outweighed a contraction in water consumption. Electricity consumption grew by 8% due to higher usage in all 6 categories. Higher sales were recorded for residential, up 2.4%, general service, that's small businesses using less than 25 kilovolt ampere, up 7.3%. Power service, that's large businesses using more than 25 kVA but less than 500 kVA, was up 5.9%. And large power, that's businesses using more than 500 kVA, was up 11%. Street lighting and other was up 3.5%. And largest power, that's rate 70, single locations with minimum peak of 2000 kVA, was up 45.3%. All 14 parishes recorded increases in electricity sales, led by Clarendon, up 30.1%, Trelawney, up 17.2%, and Westmoreland, up 13.8%. Kingston and St. Andrew continues to account for the largest share of electricity sales, that's 35.7%, followed by St. Catherine, 15.7%, and St. James, 12%. Water consumption fell by 2.6%, reflecting a contraction in the Eastern Division, down 4.6%, which outweighed an increase in the Western Division, which was up 1.7%. A total of 9 of the 14 parishes recorded contractions. All parishes in the Eastern Division recorded declines in consumption, led by Portland, down 5.8%, and Clarendon, down 5%. The growth in the Western Division was pushed by increased consumption in Hanover, up 21.8%, and Trelawney, up 3.7%. These increases may have attributed to higher tourism-related, to higher tourism-related activities in these parishes. Now, for transport, storage, and communication, real value added for the transport, storage, and communication industry grew by 8%. Mainly due to higher levels of activity in the transport and storage component, while the communication component remained flat. The outturn was driven by, 1, an improvement in the air transport component, largely reflecting growth in passenger movements, up 159.4%, due to departures, up 172.3%, and arrivals, up 148%. 2, increased maritime transport activities, reflecting a 21.2% increase in cargo handled at the heavier weighted Port of Kingston. This outweighed an estimated 32.7% decline in cargo volumes handled at outports. For wholesale and retail trade, repair and installation of machinery, real value added was estimated to have grown by 9.6% due to higher demand, stemming from 1, increased employment of 76,600 persons, 2, increased net remittance inflows by 10.9% to US $837.9 million, and 3, growth in the related construction and agriculture, forestry and fishing industries, and 4, the relaxation of COVID-19 containment measures. Higher sales were recorded for all 8 categories, led by textiles, clothing, shoes and jewelry, up 20.2%, hardware, building supplies, electrical goods and machinery, up 16.4%, and minerals, fuels, lubricants and petroleum products, up 14.1%. Real value added for the finance and insurance services industry was estimated to have grown by 2%. The performance was influenced by increased profitability of deposit-taking institutions, reflecting a rise in economic activities, employment, and growth in business and consumer confidence, as well as higher fees and commission income. Hotels and restaurants. Real value added for the hotels and restaurants industry was estimated to have grown by 76.2%. Stopover visitor arrivals for the months of October and November 2021 increased by 186.3% relative to the similar period of 2020. The performance of the industry benefited from increased vaccination and the relaxation of the previously implemented public health and social measures in Jamaica's main source markets, as well as initiatives such as the establishment of a resilient corridor domestically. Crude passenger arrivals for the months of October and November totaled 32,719 from 24 ship calls, relative to none during the corresponding period of 2020. Total visitor expenditure was estimated to have increased by 48.1% to US $379.7 million for the months of October and November 2021, compared with the corresponding period of 2020. Looking at GDP performance for January to December 2021. For the calendar year 2021, real GDP was estimated to have increased by 4.4%. This reflected higher real value added for both the goods producing industry, up 4.4%, and the services industry, up 4.4%. All industries recorded growth in output, with the exception of the mining and quarrying industry. Growth during 2021 was led by hotels and restaurants, up 36.4%, construction up 9.1%, agriculture, forestry, and fishing up 7.9%, and wholesale and retail trade, repairs, installation of machinery and equipment up 6.6%. Looking at the employment update. Regarding the employment update, our sister agency Statin has already provided an update on the labor force survey. As such, we will not present a detailed report on this area. The highlights, however, are that for the month of October 2021, the unemployment rate was 7.1%, down 3.7 percentage points. Youth unemployment decreased by 9.3 percentage points to 18.9%. The number of persons employed increased by 76,600 persons relative to October 2020. Male employment increased by 32,900 to 676,200 persons, while for females, employment increased by 43,700 persons to 558,600. The age cohorts with the largest increases were age 25 to 34, up 19,100 persons, and 35 to 44, up 15,100 persons. Now for the short-term economic outlook, January to March 2022 and fiscal year 2020-2021, as well as fiscal year 2022-23. Now turning to the short-term prospects for the Jamaican economy. Generally, the prospects are positive, given the expected impact of the further easing of the previously implemented COVID-19 containment measures. This will facilitate continued resumption or expansion of economic activities in most industries. Additionally, the further opening up of the economies of Jamaica's main trading partners will support higher levels of external demand, particularly for tourism-related products and services. Increased employment levels and the strengthening of business and consumer confidence levels are expected to support greater domestic demand in the short to medium term. The main downside to this positive outlook continues to be the possibility of additional waves of COVID-19 infections, particularly as a result of the emergence of new or more aggressive variants of the virus. Given the relatively low rate of vaccination in Jamaica, this could have implications for the reimposition of more restrictive public health and social measures and a curtailment in demand and output. The continued closure of the Jamalco refinery will result in contractions for the mining and quarrying industry for the short term. In the medium term, the expectation is that this alumina refinery will reopen in fiscal year 2022-23, and this is expected to facilitate a rebound in the mining and quarrying industry. Additionally, there is a potential of negative effects from a further deterioration in geopolitical tensions between Russia and the Ukraine. The impact of this could be manifested in several ways, including further supply chain disruptions, given that Russia is a major producer of commodities such as oil and grains. This may have implications for inflation globally. Within this context, economic growth is anticipated for the remainder of this fiscal year. For January to March 2022, it is projected that the economy will grow within a range of 5% to 7%, resulting in a fiscal year growth that is April 2021 to March 2022 in the range of 7% to 9%. For fiscal year 2022-23, the projection is for growth within the range of 3% to 6%. So in conclusion, the Jamaican economy continued to recover during the review quarter from the economic shock caused by COVID-19. All industries recorded growth, with the exception of the mining and quarrying and manufacturing, which were both impacted by production downtime due to the closure for repairs and maintenance activities. Given the preliminary outturn of some indicators for January to March 2022 quarter, the recovery process is expected to continue throughout the remainder of fiscal year 2021-22. Preliminary data indicate that total arrivals increased by 262.4% in January 2022. The economy is expected to achieve growth within the targeted range of 6% to 9%. For the upcoming fiscal year 2022-23, the forecast is that the economy will grow within the range of 3% to 6%. Note, however, that the economy is projected to achieve pre-COVID-19 levels of output in fiscal year 2023-24. The recovery process is uneven across industries, as the performance of some industries were not significantly affected by the pandemic and have already surpassed their pre-COVID levels of output, while industries that were significantly affected require a longer time to recover. Note also that the pre-COVID-19 employment level is projected to be achieved in fiscal year 2022-23. Over the past decades, Jamaica's economic growth performance has been characterized by periods of shocks and recovery, with a net result of growth averaging approximately 1% in the long term. To achieve more sustained and robust growth performance in the medium term, deliberate efforts focused on a strategy aimed at strengthening resilience of the built and natural environment must continue to be supported and implemented. In light of this, ongoing efforts must be intensified, particularly the rollout of road improvement and drainage projects, improving housing stock, irrigation projects, greater diversification in the energy mix, increased training and greater use of technology to improve productivity and competitiveness, and the increased use of strategic and scientific approaches in the mitigation of climate risks through increased use of nature-based solutions and disaster management tools. Additionally, indications are that the COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in a reorientation and restructuring of some private sector entities, ranging from the retooling and strengthening of productive capacity during the downtime to pivoting into the production of emerging technology-driven goods and services. These measures combined, both public and private sector initiatives, have begun the thrust towards increasing the complexity, diversification, and productivity within the Jamaican economy. All efforts should therefore be made at sustaining and building on the gains already achieved. It is against this background that I encourage us all to continue the dialogue and to continue the collaboration to make Jamaica the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Thank you, DG. The floor is now open for questions and comments. Remember, you can type in the chat or use the raise hand feature to be identified. Once you're identified, please state your name and organization. You may go ahead with your questions. Are there any questions? Gwyneth, do you have any questions from the other platforms? Yes, there's a question, DG, and it's from Stephen Jackson. Has the long-term prospects for growth improved? In other words, is Jamaica likely, I think that should be likely to grow beyond 1% in the medium to long term?
All right, thank you for the question. We are in a process we've seen, particularly because of some of the reforms in the last, you say 5 to 8 years in terms of macroeconomic stability, fiscal consolidation, addressing some of the structural issues and that have been impediments to Jamaica's growth capacity. A number of those initiatives were ongoing and intensified. And then with the occasion of the pandemic, as we mentioned, you've seen in some cases a pivoting, in some cases retooling to more productive areas by businesses. And then with the ongoing set of initiatives currently underway in terms of some of our strategic projects that are being implemented, we are expecting that the long-term prospects for the Jamaican economy will improve. And so it's something that has been the discussion and the focus of the government and has been in discussion by our policy makers in terms of just seeking to address what some would consider that relatively low steady state growth rate that has been characteristic of the Jamaican economy. And we are seeing measures in recent times that will give us cause to be optimistic.
Thank you, DG. Any other questions? Gwyneth, do you have any questions? Okay, there's one more. This is from Douglas McIntosh at GIS. Any updates on the Vision 2020 project implementation?
All right, so thanks, Douglas. That will be the Vision 2030 program implementation. So recall, Douglas and others, that we have been monitoring and implementing Vision 2030 through the medium-term socio-economic policy frameworks. And we have just completed now, we are just advancing, completing the 2021 to 2024, what we call MTF, medium-term framework. And that that constitutes now of a sort of revision and looking at the current the indicator profile in terms of the dashboard of indicators we continue to track in terms of progress for the Jamaican economy in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we've spoken in this forum before of just that review that had been ongoing, and that it's a consultative process where we are aligning various ministries, departments, agencies, and also private sector, their strategic plans, ensuring alignment to see new priorities that may emerge. That is ongoing. And so we'll be reporting on that. We would expect in our next press conference. All right, so in our next press briefing, which is expected to be in May 15th to be exact, right? So not that it may happen, it is in May. It will happen in May. And so we'll of course update the country. Quite a bit of activity has been ongoing in that regard. And so we have a team here that's been working very tirelessly, and we've been engaging quite a bit. It's a very consultative process. And so thank you for that. So we will have a lot to say on that process, where we are to update the country in terms of that dashboard, if you will, of indicators that we've been using to measure progress of our long-term development plan, and then also to refresh and to say impact, in some cases, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on that long-term trajectory, as well as plans going forward as we seek to continue to position Jamaica to be that place of choice. All right, so thank you very much.
DJ, a follow-up to Stephen Jackson's question. What of the price of oil for the 2022-23 year?
All right, so thank you for that follow-up. That's something that's closely monitored, as you know, by the central bank, the BOJ, and they have a strong framework and mechanism established to monitoring and managing inflation and inflationary expectations. And you've heard the central bank in recent times saying quite a bit that. So we will, as we get questions like that, we will refer to our colleagues at the BOJ for their continued assessment update and their own outlook. But rest assured, we have incorporated and in our growth numbers what we would see happening in terms of in that space. And so what you hear reflected has been mindful of all those occurrences or projections. James, anything you want to add?
No, I think you.
One more question here, DG, from Kelleray Miles. What would a cessation of the DRMA have for the projected growth prospects? Could they be significantly increased since growth has so far been hinged to the relaxation of the COVID measures?
All right, so thank you, Hillary. What we've seen is insofar as because of the nature of the pandemic, as we put in place measures to mitigate the spread of the virus, it has meant limiting people movement, and we've seen that impact, a sort of negative impact on general business activity. You've seen the tourist industry hard hit as we had to in some cases, and other countries or main tourism markets closing borders and putting in place other restrictions. And so as we've relaxed those measures, we've seen a pickup, an uptick in business activities. Remember also, Hillary, the ongoing challenge of having to balance. You still have to put in place different measures to mitigate the spread of the virus. And so there's always been that sort of challenge of balancing. We think the government has been very responsible. Persons have assessed, and we heard very recently Jamaica getting very strong marks for their handling and treatment, particularly around the responses to the COVID-19 pandemic when compared to other countries. And so we are saying that continues, that the Ministry of Health and other authorities continue to watch the space closely and continue to be responsible in that. But we've seen on the one side of this, general economic activity, you've seen general pickup where we've been able to resume or relax some of those what we call restrictive measures or restrictions on people movement. But that's always against the backdrop of continued safety of the population from the virus.
This one is from Tamar Henry from the Ministry of Tourism. I noticed a growth in the goods producing industry when compared to the same period in 2020. However, it is a 2 percentage point decline from the July to September period. Is that the impact of the mine? Is it that the impact of the mining subsector has had a major impact on the overall industry?
All right, thank you for the question, Tamar. So we want to be sure that we are comparing July to September period. If you're saying that for 2021, comparing to the same period of 2020, right? So we want to be careful that while we are reporting on the December quarter, that we are comparing apples and apples, because for seasonality and other factors, we tend to compare year over year, the similar period, 1. 2, there has been a negative impact, and we've said that with the impact of the fire on the refinery, the Jamaica refinery. We've seen before where we had cases where plants would have to close for downtime and retooling. So there tends to be that sensitivity to operations from the various plants, if you will, or factories, the refineries. And so to answer your question, yes, there's generally that negative impact. We anticipate, we said for the remainder of this fiscal year going out to March, that would continue. But then as we go out into the next fiscal year, starting April, particularly as we get about mid-fiscal year, we will see some steady pickup in capacity, the capacity utilization rate and the operations in those refineries and the overall industry.
Thanks, DG. Another from Stephen Jackson. Construction prices are sky high, with 1 bedroom now selling for 40 million. The 6.4% growth in construction, what amount of that growth is due to price hikes?
No, so James, go ahead, please. Thank you for the question, Stephen. Let me ask James Stewart, Economic Chief.
Right, so these changes that we provide are real increases, which essentially implies that it takes account for it discounts the price movements. So the price hike is not a factor in the growth we are seeing. It's not nominal increases, real increases that we're reporting.
Thanks, Mr. Stewart. Any other questions? I am not seeing any more in the chat, DG. And I'm not seeing any from Gwyneth either. So I think that's the end of that session. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for joining us and participating. Today's presentation will be uploaded to our website and social media pages of the PIOJ and Vision 2030 Jamaica. Those will be displayed on the screen. Join us again in May when we will present on the performance of the January to March 2022 period. Have a good day and stay safe.
Thank you, everyone.